Let's end this irresponsible shutdown and default threat, and let's get back to work. That's what we were sent here for. And I yield back, and I thank you, Mr. Garamendi, for your patience.
Thank you. Mr. Parcells, thank you very much. Whether you're from New Jersey or wherever, I am not about to threaten you. But I would like to welcome to this microphone our friend from the state of Massachusetts, who is probably just as tough as New Jersey, Mr. Capilano.
For the first time in my life, I have no intention of being as passionate as the gentleman from New Jersey. I thank the gentleman from California for yielding. I was going to walk people through this because, to me, good people can disagree. Reasonable people can disagree. Even people I disagree with vehemently. That's what politics, that's what government, that's what life is all about. But you're not entitled to forget history or to ignore facts. And for me, there's been lots of misrepresentations the last week or two because there's a lot of passion, a lot of emotion. But I need to back up a little bit. Educational value. When I'm told that Democrats have to come to the table and compromise, my answer is, well, we have. Repeatedly. And we will do it again if necessary. And people say, well, no, you haven't. The President's saying, no, you won't negotiate. Well, no one will negotiate on this issue at this point in time because we've already gone far enough, and here's why. 2011, the last super committee, where did it come from? It came from a budget impasse. We couldn't come to an agreement. We couldn't make a deal. We had taken our corners. What did we do? Created a super committee, and if they said if the super committee doesn't work under and do something like Simpson Bowles or whatever they would come up with, then we would institute a sequester. And a sequester, for all intents and purposes, is an across-the-board cut of roughly 8% per year, every year, for 10 years in a row. That's what it is. At the end of that 10th year, if you don't do anything, you'd be spending approximately 48 cents of every dollar you were spending when you started. Now, I understand that some people want a government that does that and the programs that would pay for. I don't agree with that, but that's a reasonable position to take. I don't want senior housing. I don't want childhood nutrition. I don't agree with it, but it's a reasonable position to take, and we should argue about that, and we should debate about that, and the American people should have an opportunity to elect people that agree or disagree with them on those types of issues. We couldn't come to an agreement. So the sequester took place. And the sequester set out numbers each year for 10 years. This is as much as you can spend unless you come up with some kind of an agreement to get around it. We haven't been able to do it. We've had the first year of sequester. We're about to enter the second year of sequester. Pursuant to the law that was passed in 2011, a law, by the way, that I voted against. I don't like the concept of sequester, but majority ruled, it passed. Pursuant to that law, in this coming fiscal year, we would have been allowed to spend a little over $1 trillion. Now remember, that number is based on an 8% cut from the prior year. So this already represents a cut, and, by the way, it represents a compromise, a massive compromise between Democrats and Republicans to pass that sequester. So it was a Democratic compromise with Republicans to cut the budget for 10 years in a row. That's where we start. This year, Republicans pass a budget of $967 billion, $100 billion below what the sequester allows. They're entitled to do that. And again, I can disagree, but I respect that viewpoint. If you really think the government can operate and provide the services the American people want on that number, fine. I will disagree, you will vote, pass it, and we'll move on. But of course, the Senate didn't agree with that number. The Senate passed another number. Here we are today. What's happened? The last week or so, you have heard pretty much every Democrat say we want to vote on the clean CR, continuing resolution, that the Senate passed. The average American has no clue what we're talking about. Here's what they passed. They passed a budget that would allow spending of $986 billion. Now, to me, if you're going to talk about a compromise, sequester allows a little over $1 trillion. Republicans want $967. A compromise is here, a little over $1 trillion. Now, that would be a compromise on a compromise. But no, the Senate says 986, a compromise on a compromise on a compromise. What the Republican House leaders say? No. 967, our number. And, by the way, no health care. So, for those of you who've thought Democrats haven't been compromising, I'm here to tell you, in my opinion, not only have we compromised, I think we have compromised too much. From my philosophical viewpoint, I know that I'm the minority view in this House. So be it. I think the sequester was too much. I certainly think 967 is too much, and I think 986 is too much. You know why? My constituents want senior housing. They want children fed. They want young people educated, and on and on and on. They want veterans benefits. They want all the things that we do. Of course, no one wants to pay for that. I get that. I don't either. I pay taxes. I wish everything was free. I'm going out to dinner in a little while, hopefully, to watch the Red Sox win this series, and I don't want to pay for dinner, but I guess I'll have to. Reasonable differences of opinion, no matter how dramatic they may be, $100 billion difference, are realistic, they're honest, and the American people have a right to take sides. They don't have a right to say Democrats haven't compromised. This was a compromise. This would have been a compromise. This is a compromise. This is not. This is uncompromising. And that's why I want to come up there. And by the way, as one little point of historic note, I've been in the House now for 14 and a half years. This is my first special order. My first special order. And, as I said, I've probably missed the first inning of the Red Sox game, which in my district is close to a cardinal sin. But this is more important. This is more important. I'm not trying to convince anyone that my side is right or the other side is wrong. People have their opinions. I know that. And you're probably not going to change them. But I am here to say that there is a difference between compromise and capitulation. We have compromised 1, 2, 3 times to get where we are. And to get to this number would be 4th, and to get rid of health care would be not just 5th, it would be 5th and the end of it. As far as I'm concerned, this Democrat will not compromise further on these issues. It's time for the other side to compromise off of what they think the world should be. Thank you for yielding, Mr. Garamendi. I yield back the balance of your time.
I want to thank you so very much. I think it's a tragedy you waited 14 and a half years to be so eloquent in explaining how we got to where we are and the fact that the Democrats have consistently cooperated, compromised, and watched those critical programs that we care so very much about being consistently hacked away at and reduced and in many cases all but eliminated. And now today we're in the 8th day of the shutdown of the United States government that used to be thought of as the most powerful democracy in the world. Well, at the moment it's a democracy that's not working. As pointed out by my colleagues, there was an election last November in which these issues were all fundamental in that debate, and the American people voted to fully enforce the Affordable Care Act and to provide the services, whether they're education, transportation, health care, and the rest. And here we are, a minority party in this House, and actually a minority of that minority party, driving an agenda that is an anathema to those things that I believe we need to do and completely contrary to last November's election. I'd like now to call upon Mr. Ryan of Ohio, a gentleman that often joins us on these evening discussions. We like to talk about jobs. We like to talk about rebuilding the American manufacturing sector, and we know that that can only be done when the United States government is operating. Mr. Ryan.
Thank the gentleman, and I appreciate my colleague's words here tonight. There's not a whole lot left really to cover, whether it was the gentleman from Pittsburgh or the gentleman from Patterson or the gentleman from East Hartford or the gentleman from Somerville and Boston area, and also the gentleman from upstate New York. We've seen them cover many of the issues here. They've been broken down. I would just like to maybe touch on a point or two. A lot of members have come to this floor, and on all the TV shows they talk a lot about, we got to pay our bills, we got to pay our bills. I think everybody here agrees that we've got to pay our bills. It's important for us to remember the bills that were racked up that we have to go out and pay. Those appropriations bills, off budget many times, were to fund 2 wars. Went right on Uncle Sam's credit card. Both of them. Not paid for, and many of our colleagues on the other side never came to this floor and said, oh my God, how are we going to pay for all this? Economist after economist would come back and say, this is going to be, it may be 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 billion today. We factor in all the veterans that are coming back. These wars are going to be $2 to $3 to $4 trillion when it's all said and done. And I don't remember being here watching a member come up on the other side of the aisle, get in the well, and make an argument that we need to pay for these wars if we're going to go. Not one. And now today, they want to talk about being responsible. They want to talk about us meeting our obligation. Now, they want to say, oh yeah, we ran up those credit cards. We swiped them, and we kept swiping them and kept swiping. And then we doubled down. We need a surge. Let's double down. Let's run that credit card one more time. And now today, they're saying, we're not going to pay the bills. We're going to default unless you repeal the Affordable Care Act. Then we'll have a conversation. So it's the height of irresponsibility. Another thing that I find humorous is how over the past few years we've been lectured to by many members of the Tea Party about the Constitution of the United States and how they're the only Americans, this 20, 25, maybe 30%, these are the only Americans who have read the Constitution. And they're the only ones that adhere to the Constitution. But yet, when we talk about the political process that we need to work through, as Mr. Capuano was just saying, hey, you can have a reasonable position. You don't like it? Go to the ballot box. Win the election. But yet those very same members are now thumbing their nose at the political process that the Founding Fathers set up for us to adhere to. We were here during the Iraq War. I was. I wasn't for it. Campaigned against it in my first campaign. Guess what? I didn't win. Didn't win the argument. 2002, 2003. Didn't win it in 2004, 2005. Came to this floor night after night after night. We finally won the House back, 2006, won the House and Senate. We tried to stop the war. We didn't do it. But we took it to the people and we won the House and the Senate back. 2007, 2008, we took it back to the street. Won the presidency, and then, longer than any of us wanted, we finally started winding things down. We went through the political process. We didn't shut the government down. We didn't say we're going to default on the credit card bills that previous Congresses ran up, even though we disagreed with how they spent the money. What's happening is radical. These are radical acts here in the House chamber. And to say we're here to negotiate if you get rid of the Affordable Care Act is ludicrous. Doesn't make any sense. Have the guts to go to the American people and make the argument. For the life of me, I can't figure out why you wouldn't let the Affordable Care Act get set up. It's so awful, right? If it's so bad, set it up, let it go. President Obama has his fingerprints all over it. The Democrats have their fingerprints all over it. If it fails, you'll win the Senate in 2014. And if it's so bad, you'll win the presidency in 2016. Then defund it. Then dismantle it. and put 30, 40 million people out of the health care system. Make sure you can get denied health care for having a pre-existing condition and put the insurance companies between the doctor and the patient. Fine. You won the elections. Perfectly capable of doing that. Have the guts to go to the street and make the argument. 70% of Americans are saying, do not shut the government down to try to end the Affordable Care Act. I will say what I think is happening here. I think the House leadership on the Republican side, I think they have Stockholm Syndrome. I think they have started to identify themselves with their captors. The Tea Party has now convinced the leadership in the House of Representatives that they should have sympathy and empathy towards their captors. And so the whole country at this point is being shut down because of this. Lastly, let me say that the only successful moments in politics that our friends on the other side have had is when they divide the American people. Who's in a union, who's not in a union, who's in a public sector union versus who's in a private sector union, who's black, who's white, who's gay, who's straight. Divide, 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 and here we are in 2013, a divided nation that is ungovernable at this point because of the power that is held by the Tea Party in the United States House of Representatives. I just want to say that there is a future waiting to be taken for this country. Investments back in the United States, into our infrastructure, into our research, into renewable energies, into expanding the grid and making it smarter, into making sure everyone has access to the latest technologies, three-dimensional printers in schools, robotics, Legos, get kids excited about learning. We only have 313 million people in the United States. We're competing against 1.4 billion people in China, and we're sitting on our hands. We're not making the investments we need to be making. And there are colleges and universities and schools that need the investment. And every day that goes by, Mr. Garamendi, every day that goes by, we see one more, two more, five more situations where investments were made collectively by the public that benefit our country. And we need to end this lockout that's happening right now, and I thank the gentleman for his leadership.
Mr. Ryan, thank you so very much for bringing us just some sense of reality of what is actually happening here. We're in the 8th day of the lockout. We're in the 8th day of the shutdown of the government of the United States of America. And it appears from all that we hear from our Republican side that this may go right up to the deficit, or excuse me, to the debt limit. What a tragedy it would be if we hit that and take down the entire economy. If I might inquire, Mr. Speaker, how much time we have available?
Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Then I think it's time for me to close. I want to thank my colleagues. I'd ask the American people to pay attention. And finally, Mr. Speaker, let us vote. Mr. Speaker Boehner, let us vote on a clean, continuing resolution so that we can once again start this government. The votes are here, and if you don't believe the votes are here, put us up on the board. Let's see if there's 217 votes to reopen the American government. Can only find out, Mr. Speaker, if you let us vote. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by saying, Mr. Speaker, I'm exceptionally privileged to be here on the House floor, the United States Congress, this evening. To speak on behalf of your constituents and in front of the nation is an honor that few people realize, and it's worthy of mention. I just want to Also thank the fine gentlemen, ladies from the other side that were here this evening, and appreciate your impassioned pleas. And that's what this place is all about. I might disagree with many of them, but I appreciate your passion and your willingness to serve. Just want to talk about a couple things, and at least from my side, Mr. Speaker, set the record, or at least kind of balance the record, maybe not set it straight in some people's mind, because I'm sure some folks will disagree. But when the one gentleman said that he opposed the Iraq War and folks were here spending on it on a credit card, and he was opposed to that. Well, I wasn't here, so I can't really atone for the sins of the past, and there's a good chance that I would disagree with many of them. But one of the reasons I wasn't here is because I was in Iraq at that time. And even though I think it is morally wrong to have spent this nation into such debt over those conflicts, when you're attacked you must respond, number one. And number two, I think it kind of belies the fact that the current administration has nearly doubled that spending in half the time. And so, with all due respect, I think it's fair just to point that out. And regarding another gentleman who talked about the interest of the other side to negotiate and agree to a compromise and to compromise, and looking at the numbers, the sequester came from the President of the United States out of another super committee that was created, and the President demanded the sequester, demanded the number. And so this Congress has given it to him, and this Congress has held that number. It was demanded out of that negotiation. So by saying that they've compromised, they haven't compromised on anything. That's where we all agreed to be at the end of that negotiation. Now, there's been a lot of impassioned talk and yelling and wailing, and I don't really think that's helpful to the narrative here. We're all going to have to work together at some point and figure this thing out, and blaming one side and the other side, I just don't know where that really gets us. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the facts. And these aren't my facts, not Scott Perry's facts. I've got the Washington Post here because some people say this is unprecedented. Never happened before, and only one party does this. Well, there was a shutdown in 1976. Gerald Ford was the president. The Democrats held both houses. It was ended by all sides coming together and working towards a continuing resolution. Next one was in 1977. Jimmy Carter was the president. Democrats held both houses. Amazingly, it was resolved by both sides coming together and working on a Medicaid ban. Then there was the shutdown of 1977. Jimmy Carter was the president. Democrats were in charge of both houses. They signed a temporary bill because they came together and worked something out. The 1977 shutdown under Jimmy Carter, Democrats were in charge. And they were doing what they thought they needed to do. They're elected by their people to do the work of this House. But they came together after 8 days, and they resolved it. The next one, 1978. Jimmy Carter was the president. The Democrats controlled both houses. 18 days. 18 days. But they resolved it after they got together. The President, the Senate, and the House, they got together. 1979, Jimmy Carter was the President. The Democrats were in charge of both houses. 11 days. What resolved it? They got together and they talked. Nothing happens here and nothing will happen here if we're not going to be willing to be civil to one another and get together and talk. 1981, Ronald Reagan was the president. The Republicans had the Senate. The House was controlled by Democrats. After 2 days, they resolved it. Again, Reagan came down and signed a bill extending the current spending limit. And then again, in September of '82, Ronald Reagan was the president. Republicans had the Senate. Democrats held the House. Tip O'Neill was the speaker. But they resolved it in just 1 day, because they got together. Both of them were out that evening having fundraisers, both parties. And they let the government shut down. But they got together and moved beyond it. 1982, Tip O'Neill. Again, the speaker. Republicans in charge of the Senate, Ronald Reagan. Over the MX missile, they shut it down. But they figured out a way to get past it because they negotiated. And for 3 days in 1983, Ronald Reagan was the president, Republicans in charge of the Senate House, controlled by Democrats with Tip O'Neill, and they resolved it again over about a $100 million discrepancy. 1984, Ronald Reagan was the president. Republicans had the Senate. The House was controlled by the Democrats. Over a Supreme Court ruling, they shut it down. But they resolved it after all sides coming together and negotiating. It says keep negotiating. This is from not a right-wing paper in town here. This is not my facts. 1984, Ronald Reagan was the president. Republicans had the Senate. The House was controlled by Democrats. Tip O'Neill was the speaker, and they shut it down again. But they opened it back up. The 13th one happened in 1986 under Reagan. Republican Senate was controlled. Bob Dole, Democrats by Tip O'Neill. And they resolved it by getting together, and each side gave up some of their demands, and they expanded welfare in return for appropriations necessary to reopen the government. Ronald Reagan in 1987 was the president, Democrats in control of both houses, and again, they found a way to get together on the fairness doctrine. And in 1990, George H.W. Bush was the president, Democrats controlled both houses, and they figured it out and signed a continuing resolution and reduced the deficit. And then the 16th time, Clinton was the president, and Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. The Senate was controlled by Republicans, and so was the House. But even then, they worked it out. Even then, they worked it out. When two sides were against the president, they found that both houses in Congress, Mr. Speaker, they found a way to work it out. And then for 21 days in 1995, with Clinton as the president, and the House controlled by Republicans and the Senate controlled by Republicans, again, what resolved it? They worked it out. They got together and they worked it out. So let's go to the debt limit, because we have also heard this is a historic time. It's unprecedented. It's never happened before, Mr. Speaker. So in 1970 is where we found out the practice of attaching non-germane provisions to the debt limit began in earnest. 1971, Social Security changes. 1972, the spending cap and impoundment of powers on the proposal to increase the debt limit. And I'm just skipping because there's a pile of them here. 1980, Congress repealed an oil import fee. President Carter vetoed the bill. Both houses of Congress were Democrat. And President Carter was a Democrat. But he vetoed it, and they overrode the veto by wide majorities. But they worked it out. They worked it out. 1985, 1990, 1993, 1996, 97, 2010, 2011, 2012. The debt limit is the appropriate place in this divided government to find some fiscal sanity. And that's what's happening here right now in this town. Now, of course, like I said, I don't want to get into the blame game here, and I'm really going to try to stay out of it. You know, whether we agree with Obamacare or not really is not the issue. It might be a great law. And there are many other laws that some people think are great laws or not great laws. The question really should be, and really is can we afford it? Can we afford it? We are running $1 trillion as deficit every single year. We take in $1 trillion less than we spend. $1 trillion less than. So, if your household brings in $100,000, you're spending $25,000 more every single year as a ratio more than you bring in. I ask the American people, Mr. Speaker, how long can you stand? How long can you stand? So even if we agree that it's a good law, and many of us don't, but that's fair. But even if we agree that it's a good law, how are we going to pay for it? That's the question. Now, Congress's job in this House and this Senate is to craft legislation and to determine our spending priorities and our spending levels. That's our job. Now, the other gentleman said, we haven't read the Constitution, it's in the Constitution. It's very simple. That is our job. And with all due respect to the President, I got to tell you, it does not help. Again, we're going to have to work together. It's for the sake of our nation. It does not help to be lectured to about what we must do here according to the President when it's exactly what he would not do and did not do when he served in this building. It does not help. Now, our constituents elected us. The citizens of our district elected us. They elected us to come here and do something, to do something. And we keep on hearing from the other side, just pass a clean CR. Just pass it and everything will be fine. I came here to do something. We are spending $1 trillion more than we bring in every single year. We are $17 trillion in debt. The bill that's being implemented, the law that's being implemented right now, it's going to cost us $2 or $3 trillion. We don't know. And the president, I understand, I'm not sure of the number, but is going to ask in a week to raise the debt ceiling another $900 billion. So that's $100 billion short of $1 trillion, which are still all numbers that are staggering to my mind. So if we add that up, okay, so at the minimum we're at $20 trillion, and that doesn't include Social Security and all the other obligations that we have. And the clean CR that we're being beseeched to just vote on, so everything will be fine, says that's okay, just keep going. Don't change a thing. Everything's fine, nothing to see here. And everything's not fine. The constituents that elected me had 3 concerns when I ran. And I hear about them every single day at the grocery store, at the gas station, on my telephones, in email, and in the letters they send to me. Do something about this debt. Do something about this deficit. Do something about this spending. Do something about Obamacare. That's what they send to me. That's what they tell me. You know, maybe the world doesn't understand where this is going to end, but a lot of us do. When our dollar isn't worth anything, when we have to take a wheelbarrow of dollars to the grocery store to buy just what we need to survive, that's where it will end. We don't have to go there. We are choosing to go there, and it doesn't have to be that way. Another one of the gentlemen said, well, we need to move on so we can make investments in education, investments in infrastructure. And he's right. The world is leaving us behind. He's right. But we only have so much money. So we have to prioritize, Mr. Speaker. We must prioritize, and that's what this is about. We said we've only got so much, and if you want to spend it a bunch more on education and on infrastructure so we can compete, then you're not going to have so much money to spend on some other things. But nobody wants to make that distinction. Nobody wants to choose in this place. Some of us, reluctantly, because it's unpleasant, but reluctantly we know it is our duty, and so we are forced to choose, and we are ready to choose. I say doing nothing because it's doing nothing because passing a clean CR will do nothing to fix our $17 trillion debt and our $1 trillion annual deficits. It will do nothing. So I will go home to my constituents, to the people that elected me, and they'll say, what did you get accomplished? And I will say nothing. I won't say nothing. No, I will say I tried. I might fail. I might fail. But I'm not going down on my knees, Mr. Speaker. I'm going down, and if I go down, I'll go down fighting, because I can't do nothing. I don't want to see a government shutdown. Nobody in this place wants to see it. It's not good for this side. It's not good for that side. It's not good for the American people. It is not good. We acknowledge that. But why should anyone believe the concerns about debt and deficit will be discussed when they haven't been discussed in the 5 years? And to be clear and to be honest, they haven't been discussed really ever. Republicans, Democrats, nobody wants to touch it. I've got a mother on Social Security, Medicare. I don't want to see her out on the street. I will take care of my mother. That's what we do in our family. We will not let that happen, but some people don't have that option. I don't want to see it go bankrupt, but right now, Social Security, disability, that portion of Social Security, the last report I saw will be bankrupt in a year and a half. In a year and a half. Social Security, 10, 15 years behind it. Medicare, Medicaid, bankrupting our nation, and we're doing nothing. We're doing nothing. We can't do nothing. And so we must discuss it. We must get to the issue. So we can't agree to this thing where the other side says, just pass it. Let us spend as much as we want to, and we promise you that we'll come to the negotiation table and talk to you about the things that are important to you. With all due respect, they haven't been important enough in the last 5 years or the last 20 years. And so we have no reason to believe, I have no reason to believe that they will. And those who say that one side is doing this for partisan reasons, for political gain, I ask, what political gain? What is the upside? What is the upside for me, any of us? There is none. The representatives in this body who disagree with passing a clean CR are putting themselves at peril for love of country and love of the future. I've got two little girls that I'm desperate to have the same opportunities that I had. When I grew up, our house didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. My parents were often unemployed. Me and my brother ate some strange things just to eat because we didn't know any better. We did okay. We did okay. And we made a life for ourselves. But we had an opportunity in America. But that opportunity is going to slip away from us because of the way we are handling our fiscal house. Look at what will happen if we continue without adjusting course. I would argue that the first people that would lose their jobs under this situation are government workers. When we can no longer borrow from the Chinese, when we can no longer borrow from ourselves. Social Security, the Social Security Trust Fund, part of that $900 billion that they're going to ask us to raise the debt ceiling so we continue to borrow is coming out of the Social Security Trust Fund. Who agrees with that? I don't know one American that says that's okay. And somehow this is the only place in the world where it would be okay, but government employees, just like in Greece, when they ran out of money, when they ran out finally, the first ones to go. Not for a week, not for a couple days, gone. The job is gone. You are no longer working. You have no job. There's nothing to come back to. We don't have to do it. We don't have to. We can make a choice now. We're not saying turn the ship around on a dime. We're saying turn the wheel a little bit, just a little bit, and let's start heading to the course of correction. But voting for a clean CR says just keep going. Just keep going. Don't worry about the torpedoes. Don't worry about the iceberg. Just keep going. So just like in Cyprus, we'll come home to find out the banks under federal control and federal order will have removed the money from our savings account. They'll just do it. That's what they did in that country because they ended up where we're going. Why would we do it? Now, those who say they want a clean CR, they are patriots. I know that. They are hearing from their constituents. I've had constituents come in crying, literally crying, in my office, and we talk about their situation. Those folks that want to vote on a clean CR, they are patriots too. They want to fix it. They just don't want to do it now. But I would say that it is time to do the hard right because for too long the easy wrong has been done. I don't know when they want to do something, but I want to do it now because I don't think we can wait. Now, we have offered our ideas and we have asked for their ideas. We have offered them. We understand and respect the other side disagrees with our solution. We had 4 votes in this House before this government shut down. 4 bipartisan votes. People on both sides of the aisle voted 4 times for something. But the Senate disagrees. The President disagrees. I respect they disagree. I respect that they don't like our solution. It is their prerogative, and maybe it's their duty. All we're saying is okay, fine, you disagree, I get it. What's your idea? What's your solution? The solution should not be nothing. The solution from them has been no. Now go about your business and come up with what we want. It just seems like not negotiating. If I had a fight with my wife, if I had a dispute with my daughter, I never want to go to bed angry at my family. And I never want my family to go to bed angry at me. Before the day's done, we're going to sit down at the table and we're going to talk about it. We might go to bed a little sore with each other, but we love each other and we love this country. And so it's imperative that we stay with each other and work through it. We understand and respect the other side. We understand that they don't want to do anything with Obamacare, but Obamacare adds $2 to $3 trillion to our national debt. So if you don't want to do a thing about that, fine. What do you want to do? That's all I'm asking. That's all we're asking. What do you want to do? Some say, well, you need to raise taxes. Obamacare raised taxes, I think it was the largest tax increase in history. Okay, so we did that. And that wasn't enough, so just last December when I wasn't here, another $650 billion in taxes on an economy that's struggling to get through. 1 to 2% growth. We're choosing this, and I don't think we have to. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, that we're taking in more tax revenue right now, than ever before in history? There's more money coming in now than ever before, and we're $1 trillion apart every year. I mean, how much more can we take? Should we just take it all? I mean, that's another form of government. It's been done. It doesn't work out real well. But some will say, well, cut the military. Well, this place cut the military about $1.2 trillion over the last year and a half. And for me, the Constitution says, provide. Uses that word, provide for the common defense, Mr. Speaker. The line below it is promote the general welfare. Words mean things. We have a duty to provide for it. Certainly there are inefficiencies. I've been in the military. I've served, and I know they're there. And it's right to take a look. Everything needs to be on the table. But how much more? And how much do we enfeeble ourselves and disable our ability to do our constitutional requirement, which is to protect the citizenry? It is our requirement. Now, we passed a bunch of bills in the House here, and to tell you the truth, I kind of like it. We're moving towards the CR one piece at a time, so I don't have to vote for things that I don't think we should spend money on for the sake of the things that we must spend money on. Mr. Speaker, it's not optimal, but it's a way to get there. But like for cancer research for kids, we passed that out of the House, and the Speaker says, or the Leader of the Senate says, well, when asked, well, why won't you pass it? He says, well, why would we want to do that? My goodness, why wouldn't we want to do that? That's where we have consensus. We have some consensus. Another gentleman questioned why Congress has the right to pick and choose what gets funded. Isn't it astounding that someone in the Senate doesn't understand that not only is it the right of Congress to do that, but it's our duty. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're supposed to do. We have offered numerous ideas. The Senate says no. They don't say no, but they just say no. Refusing to negotiate is, in my mind, irresponsible. I mean, I don't know if they're here for themselves or the greater good of the nation. When I hear reports, I don't know if they're true, but they're reported in the newspapers that the park rangers are told, make it as difficult as possible. And when I see the World War II memorial, when I went out on the mall this morning, World War II memorial barricaded up. Like, costs more money to close it than it does to leave it open. I saw a cone out on one of the streets with barricades all around the cone in the middle of the street. I mean, why are we renting barricades to, you know, and on the street, on the mall adjacent to the street that's closed because it's a federal park area, there's an immigration rally that's being supported by the park police. What's happening, Mr. Speaker? The Grand Canyon closed. I guess you can't walk up to the rim and look over. The state offered to pay the bill, and the federal government said, no, we don't want your money. We want to close it. Is that reasonable? I don't know. It's not reasonable to me. It was the Washington Post that reported employees were to make it as inconvenient as possible. Now, some are characterized around here as being extreme, an extreme faction. The 4 bills that we passed to avert this shutdown were passed by this side and that side together. 4 bipartisan bills. And that they say the House is being held hostage by a few members. I don't know. Bipartisan votes from both sides seems less than extreme to me. And I got to ask, since when are Americans who want to see the government act within the constitutional bounds, that is, the House and the Senate, the Congress figuring out our spending level and our spending priority, when is that extreme? Why is that extreme? That's our job. That's the division of powers. That's the checks and balances. That's what we do. That's why we're here. How is that extreme? How is spending trillions of dollars more than you have now viewed as responsible? How is talking about trying to save some money and be responsible with the taxpayers' money on our future, how is that seen as extreme? Why is it okay to think that spending that money is okay and acceptable to most Americans? Who gets away with that kind of behavior in their own households? Well, you do, but not for very long, I guess. With that, I'd like to yield some time, if I could. The fine gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Thank you. I appreciate it, friend from Pennsylvania. You were mentioning some of the things that the prior speakers, Democrats, were saying, and one of the things that was said was, give us a vote.
when, as my friend from Pennsylvania pointed out, there have been plenty of votes. They also were saying that, talking about budget conferees, we're past the end of the fiscal year. The way it's supposed to work, we're supposed to have a budget very early in the year, and then after that do the appropriations bills. Well, the Senate has not been doing budgets in the past. This is the first time in years. They haven't done what the law requires. They seem to ignore the law anytime they wish. They have not been passing any appropriations bills, and that's a political game that allows Majority Leader Harry Reid to avoid following the law so that any potential vulnerable Democratic senators will not have to take tough votes like people do in the House constantly, because we've passed appropriation bills and we continue to do that. And so we know, since we passed a military pay bill that required that the military get paid, we treat military pay somewhat like we do Social Security pay, so that if the government were shut down, the military still gets paid. People in harm's way don't have to worry about family members getting their check. So since my friend across the aisle was so upset about not having a vote, and I realize we get busy here and some people forget the things we've been voting on the last 10 days. So I'd just like to remind my friends across the aisle, Mr. Speaker, that actually we voted after we passed a bill to pay our military, and as my friend Mr. Perry knows, the Democrats voted for it, the Senate voted for it, the President signed it, and in the bill, as we spelled out, civilians were supposed to continue employment that were assisting the military. Contractors were supposed to continue working that were supporting the military, and yet this administration had chosen to try to make as many people suffer as possible, even though the law didn't require it. So the Secretary of Defense sat on his hands for about a week, had civilian personnel not working that could have been working all this time, decides after a week to follow the advice, he says, of his people that have been looking at the bill. And we made clear from the very beginning, before the shutdown even started, you don't have to send all these people home, but he did it anyway. It was consistent with what has been mentioned. One of the park rangers said, though it was disgusting to the ranger, we were told make things as difficult for people as we can. But after that vote, and people keep saying we were demanding the total repeal of Obamacare. Well, we know that would be best for America because a lot of people are already suffering. We've already seen Obamacare is not being put into law or is not being followed as law because the President has had hundreds of exemptions that he has waved his hand, waved his magic wand and said, you don't have to follow this law, you don't have to follow this law, you don't have to follow what's here in this provision, you don't have to follow what's in this provision. And by the way, the business mandate in the law makes no exceptions. Business folks, my party still wants to get your contributions, so I will wave my wand and you don't follow the law. So when my friends across the aisle say, you know, just let Obamacare go, I would say the same thing. You let Obamacare go if the President will, if Harry Reid will. If you'll just let it be enforced exactly the way it is, it won't last a month. But he has had to do so many waivers and will continue, so it's not going into law. And in fact, the Supreme Court had to rewrite it just to uphold it because they already said that the basis for the law that was given, the Interstate Commerce Clause, was not a basis to take over health care in America, so they struck it down on under the law as written, and the law as written said there was a penalty. Well, the Supreme Court said at page 15 it's a penalty, and therefore the Anti-Injunction Act does not apply. Therefore, we do have jurisdiction. And so now that we have jurisdiction, we'll go ahead and decide it's not constitutional the way it's written as a penalty, but we will rewrite it. The 5 of us in the majority, we will rewrite the law and we'll call it a tax, and then we'll uphold it as a tax, even though clearly that's not the way it was written. And it's not what the President promised the American people. So much for the Democrats wanting Obamacare to be followed as it was written. We're way beyond that with all the waivers and exemptions. But then we had a vote that said, okay, let's just suspend it for a year because everybody knows Obamacare is not ready for prime time, clearly. That's why the President had to give business a 1-year exemption where we just won't follow the law as it's applied to business. But then, after the Senate refused to even take that up, we did the most reasonable thing that some said they could imagine, and that is, okay, you gave business, you just waived off the mandatory requirements for business. So if you're going to magically waive off part of the law that's mandatory, then let's agree to do that for everyone. The person that's making $15,000 or so, 133% of the poverty level. A year or so ago, we were told that was 14-something, now 15. But even under articles that have been written, they describe, even with subsidies, you're probably going to end up paying a few $1,000s. Somebody making $15,000 or so has got an extra few thousand over their subsidies, and if you don't do that, you're going to pay either $95 or 1% of your income as an extra tax. People do not have that extra money. People have been sent from full-time to part-time. As the unions finally figured out, when the union members figured out what the union leaders had done to them, caused them, many of them, to lose full-time employment going to part-time employment, many of them losing their great health insurance, and now they'll have to go under the Obamacare exchanges like members of Congress. They got upset, and then all of a sudden the leaders of the union said, gee, look at all the unintended consequences. We knew there were intended consequences. We talked about it at the time. So that was something we had passed. All right, just waive the individual mandate for a year, and, you know, that was not taken up by the Senate. So then we passed what to me seemed like a capitulation. We appointed negotiators and said, okay, you don't like any of those proposals, Mr. Majority Leader Harry Reid, then this is what adults do. We appoint negotiators, and we could probably have a deal done by morning before anybody realizes there's even been a shutdown at midnight. But Majority Leader Reid, following the lead of our President, made clear that they were going to follow the conventional wisdom of the last few years, that if there's a shutdown, the mainstream media will clearly blame Republicans, and maybe that will help us politically. So he even refused to negotiate. So once we saw that Harry Reid had completely refused to even negotiate, pretty reasonable folks that were appointed by Speaker Boehner, the majority leader says we're not going to do that. Then, it's possible he could have slept through it. Maybe I was giving a speech and my Democratic friends dozed off and didn't know we had all these votes. So if they happened to be sleeping while we had these votes, I would like to remind people that actually then we had a bill that we voted on to provide local funding for the District of Columbia, because we know the District of Columbia has a lot of money of its own that comes in. Frankly, I was shocked that our friends across the aisle, most of them, voted against allowing the District of Columbia to just move forward with its own money so that it could run the operations of the city. Apparently, they wanted to inflict as much harm as possible so that people would continue to blame the Republicans. We know the mainstream media has long since quit being objective. 21 stories from the mainstream media at first all unanimously blamed Republicans, failing to report that Harry Reid would not even appoint negotiators to work something out quickly. And then we passed Open Our National Parks and Museums Act, and it would have made sure that all of these places that have been shut down by this administration in the most hurtful, harmful, punitive way possible, trying to get everybody in America they can to hurt some way so that they can blame Republicans, when it's simply the decision of the president. We answered by saying, okay, Democrats across the aisle, you want to vote? Let's vote. There's no need to do this. And the response across the aisle was to vote. Most of the Democrats voted to leave them shut. They weren't going to vote with us to fund our national parks. And then we had a vote, Research for Life-Saving Cures Act, H.J.Res 73, to provide funding for the National Institute of Health, which was responsible for life-saving medical innovations in cancer research. Most, except for about 20 or so Democrats, they all voted not to fund the National Institute of Health. Our friends across the aisle say, give us a vote. They got a vote. You want to fund the NIH? Then vote to do it. We'll send it down, but even though we passed it and sent it down the hall, Harry Reid was not going to do it because, as my friend pointed out, when he was asked if you could save one child with cancer, why wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you do that? He said, why would I do that? Why would we do that? And then he chastised the reporter for asking a question which in his mind he thought was a silly question. I thought it was an excellent question. And then many of us believed there was enough latitude to pay some of our reservists on active duty, but the Defense Department took a narrow interpretation so they could punish more people and blame the Republicans. So to counter that, we passed a Pay Our Guard and Reserve Act on October 3rd that ensured during the shutdown that it would not affect the pay for our National Guard and Reserves. Let's see, again, 160 Democrats voted against that. They asked for a vote, we give them a vote. And most of them voted against it. Then our friend Harry Reid down the hall said, no way, we're not funding them. Then, and again, maybe our friends were asleep. Sometimes when I talk, I put people to sleep. It happens. I'm a very restful speaker. We passed the National Emergency Disaster Recovery Act. That provided immediate funding for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. 164 of our Democratic friends voted against that, and Harry Reid refuses to bring it up. We had actually brought up a bill to pay our veterans, make sure our wounded warriors were taken care of. And the way the rules of the House have been and are, you can bypass the committee of jurisdiction and go straight to the floor without the committee bringing the bill to the floor, without it being voted out of committee, under what's called a suspension. But to bypass a committee of jurisdiction, it requires 2/3 votes in the House. I, like Speaker Boehner, thought surely you can bring the Veterans Bill to the floor under a suspension because surely they will vote to fund our wounded warriors. Most of us were totally shocked that the vast majority of Democrats voted against funding our veterans, our wounded warriors, so we had to go back, have the Committee of Jurisdiction pass it, bring it to the floor under a rule so a simple majority would pass it, and that's what we did with H.J.Res 72 when 157 of our friends crossed the aisle who wanted a vote, they got a vote, they voted against funding our wounded warriors. We also took up the Nutrition Assistance for Low-Income Women and Children Act that provided immediate funding for the Special Supplement Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children. Serves nearly 9 million mothers and young children, provides vital nutrition that poor families might otherwise be unable to afford. 164 of our Democratic friends voted against that bill, but it passed the House nonetheless. We sent it down to Harry Reid. They've been wanting a vote. We gave them a vote. On October 5th, we voted for the Federal Employee Retroactive Pay Fairness Act. It provided for compensation for federal employees furloughed due to Senate Democrats' government shutdown, and it's similar to the bipartisan legislation enacted during previous shutdowns. And we did pass that, but Harry Reid thus far has refused to take that up.
Will the gentleman suspend?
Yes, I certainly.
I must ask the chair if I can